for. All right, welcome in everyone. Well, while we get everyone coming in here, we're going to start this off with a little bit of a positive message. Get my notifications going. All right, we're all here and put on this earth for a reason. I believe one of those reasons is to protect our children and guide our youth down a positive path in life. It is our duty and privilege to protect their innocence. Forrest, you want to kind of let us know a little bit about Vets for Child Rescue?
Certainly. Veterans for Child Rescue, our mission is to expose and eradicate child trafficking. Veterans for Child Rescue is a nonprofit comprised of military professionals, former and current law enforcement, senior intelligence, community veterans, child abuse and traffic survivors, and people who are willing to do whatever it takes to end child trafficking in the USA. Today, we're joined by one of our strategic allies, Jaeson Jones. I'll let you finish that introduction, Tyler.
All right. Yes, we got Jaeson Jones as the director and CEO of Omni Intelligence, a private company that strives to make the public and government agencies aware of the threats posed by unsecured borders and best practices to combat transnational crime. Mr. Jones is a nationally recognized authority on the Mexican cartels, who lectures across the U.S., is a regular guest on Fox Business News, and is on local and national radio programs. Mr. Jones, we welcome you here, and I appreciate your patriotism and your knowledge that you have on this topic. I believe you are one of the most intelligent people that is on the border crisis.
Oh, man. Well, listen, guys.
More about yourself?
Yeah, no, listen, thank you very much. It's great to be with you, and appreciate the opportunity to be on with you guys again. It's always great to be with y'all. It really is. I'm just like anybody else. I was just as frustrated about what was happening at the border and what was not being told to the American people that I decided to do it myself. And so 5.5 years ago, after retiring as a captain in the Intelligence and Counterterrorism Division of the Texas Department of Public Safety, and after moving 9 times across the state of Texas, including being stationed on that border in El Paso as a trooper and an undercover narcotics agent in Brownsville, Texas, including a lieutenant in the narcotics service in Laredo as the war broke out, I was so angry that what was happening on the crime side was not getting out to the American people that I decided to do it. And if you would have told me that 5.5 years later, after trying to get these cartels designated as foreign terrorist organizations, that we would be seeing what we are seeing right now, I would have never believed it, guys. I really wouldn't have. So I wish I could tell you that we've got a lot of successes under our belt, but the truth is the American people have been failed. And so that's exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing. And so today I'm Newsmax's border correspondent. I'm really, really humbled by it.
Well, that's great to hear. It's really interesting too, is I always think back in American history, and one of the charters that the U.S. had, the federal government, when we formed our union, is that they're supposed to protect our borders. That was one of the first things that they, after we became a nation. So when you look at what's happening down there, I am not an expert, but I have had the chance to go down there. And every single day there were 8 days, something weird and crazy happened. I mean, you don't have to go looking for crazy there. It's all around you.
Yeah. Well said. It finds you, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. A funny story, just kind of give you an idea. I went to pick somebody up from the airport, and this guy I was in a big old van, and he was on my butt trying to get to the Laredo International Airport. I mean, he was pushing hard, and I was thinking, this guy's really in a hurry. He just gets around me before he turns into the airport. And as I'm following him in, I see a lot of lights, and the lady I was picking up, she's calling me frantic. And I jokingly said, "Are you getting arrested already?" And she says, "You're not going to believe this, but a gunfight just almost broke out in front of me. A car crashed into a parked car in the terminal. And what happened was this guy was in a police chase. He drove into the airport, crashed, and I was probably less than a minute behind this accident, and there were probably 15 to 20 DPS officers on site. And so I was, I got her in the car. We were secure, and DPS kind of came around. I said, "Hey, you mind if I drive through the parking lot there to get out of there?" He goes, "Why don't you just hang tight for about 10 minutes? We've got just about everything under control." So I said, "All right, I'll do that." But yeah, everybody acted like, well, this is just another day in Laredo.
I was just on with Greta Van Sesteren showing exactly what you're just describing, another pursuit, another bailout in South Texas where DPS aircraft was involved. And, you know, we embed with DPS aircraft a lot because from the air, you can see it the view in its entirety. When you're on the ground, you're very limited in scope. And so one thing I'm big on, and I learned when I was running the Cross-Border Operations Center for the Texas Rangers, is that if you illuminate this problem, this is how we eliminate it. The more we show the American people. So that's really what we do now. My whole emphasis is to take the trade craft that I know from the old days, where I was really a collector, right? I mean, that's what a narcotics agent does by trade. And so I use that along with sources within the cartels to illuminate what they're doing to the American people today. Where really most journalists, if you really look at what they do, they go to the border, they see a group of people crossing, and they just stick a microphone in their face. Well, that's nothing. I mean, that's as easy as it gets. That's a single surface layer where you get somebody telling you their sob story of why they're coming to the US. And maybe it's a great story, you never know, but it's a single layer. When you start to peel back that onion at tradecraft and what we are truly seeing with the cartels and the alien smuggling organizations and the HUMINT network, which has operational control of your border that checks on and off over 30 miles into the United States and is utilizing two-way handheld encrypted radios and encrypted apps to communicate to Central in Mexico and how they control gates, then you realize you are up against something much bigger than just a bunch of people trying to walk across that border. You are truly up against something that these cartels have become today, which is a parallel government in Mexico. And so that's what I try to do. And that's why I go in with law enforcement to show it from their perspective. And the more you show it from their perspective, you're closer to the problem set and the multiple layers that they deal with versus just walking down there as a journalist. And I think that, guys, is where we win. And that's why we're doing what we're doing.
You know, if you speak to the military members, so the folks that are in Border Patrol and in DPS and various law enforcement, a lot of these guys have served in the military. Yeah. Do they comment on what, whenever they see a militaristic type operation on our side of the borders, what do they have to say about that? Oh yeah. I'm one of the few journalists who's been allowed to embed with the Texas National Guard and show it. And it was a great interview. I interviewed a lieutenant and I actually spent the night with him out there, and we were just roving, going from one LPOP listening post, lookout post to the next, right? Meeting all his people. And literally he's talking about drones crossing in every single night, every night from the cartel on the Mexico side coming into the US to monitor his people. Now, we all didn't realize that was happening until he was able to bring that up. So yeah, I hear stories, and that guy was a hardened veteran, had over 21 years of service, had served in many battle theaters around the world, and had done some great work. And I was really lucky to have been with him because he could talk about just how sophisticated what we were up against from that perspective, and it was really great. It was a great interview. The other thing he was able to do is talk about the wristbands that the Gulf Cartel, where he was operating, is putting on men, women, and children. And we went through that. We were walking down some paths where there's literally so many of them, you can just pick them up off the ground, and got that interview out as well. So how many different color wrists? I mean, can you give us a sense of the representation by color, or, what is a yellow band versus a green band? Do you have a sense of that? Oh yeah. Oh, you show and tell. Oh my God. Gents, I broke this story in February of 2021. What you are witnessing right now is how emboldened Cartel de Golfo, also known as CDG, has become. That they created a process, and this is what you're witnessing. In the beginning, when this started in February, when we broke it, there were only a few of these colored wristbands. Each one represents a different alien smuggling organization working directly for Cartel de Golfo, also known as CDG. And the reason they did this is because just as law enforcement was dealing with overwhelming numbers, so were they. So they created a process by which they put
these wristbands on men, women, and children. If you see this one, you see how it's tightened all the way down, but yet it's not broken. Or every single one of these I'm holding are broken, because when they cross into the U.S., they just break them and leave them based on guidance from the Gulf. So this one's not, because it's on a child. And when they cross on a child, you see it all the time. Little kids just slip them right off and drop them, because that's what their parents are telling them to do. Anyway, so what this represents is when you go into a stash house in 𝐋𝐈𝐕𝐄 on the Mike side, you give what's known as your PII, or personal identifying information. You give them all the information you have on your driver's license or host nation, where you come from, and then your family's information. Once they get that, plus where you're going, or at least they validated enough to their degree, they're going to put one of these on you. And I don't know if you can see this or not. I'm going to hold this up. Tell me, can you see that number? It's a number right here. Anyway, that number goes, I don't know if you can see it, but either way, that number goes in a database.
2411.
It's assigned to a migrant, okay? It's assigned to a migrant. Then they wear this, and this allows them 3 crossings. So they come across, if they get picked up by Border Patrol and they come from a country that they're not allowed to stay, and they're kicked back, and then they get 2 more. If they are just from, any place other than Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, or El Salvador, those 4 countries are the only 4 countries not allowed to stay in this country. Everyone else is allowed to stay. So those folks have to go back. So they get with the amount of money that they spend. And if you're a Mexican citizen, it's about $2,500 just to cross that river. If you're Central American, it's $3,000. If you're Chinese, it's $5,000. If you're Middle Eastern or Russian, it's about $9,000. Now that's just across the river. And so that's what this represents. And what we are talking about is debt bondage. We are not talking about human smuggling, because most of these migrants, hell, most Americans don't have that kind of money. So now they're indebted to these people. They are allowed to come into the United States. CBP picks them up, moves them throughout the United States, but yet they are indebted to a criminal organization in a foreign country for years to come. And if you would have told me that here we would be this much later in time, in October of 2022, and no one would have shut down these operations, I would be stunned. But here we are. Every night you can go to Roma, Texas, and watch anywhere from 80 to about 300 to 500 men, women, and children cross in one line as CDG sends them across into the U.S. And then once all resources, law enforcement, are focused on these families, then they send the runners. Those are people who come from those 4 countries I just identified: Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. If they get through, then that's when they move the high values in the dope. It's all a process. So when you see on news, I just laugh. I see some of these journalists go down, they stick a microphone in these families' faces, and they tell a heart sob story. But what they don't realize is the operations occurring around them and how controlled these things really are. I didn't mean to go on, but there's a lot to it. It's very detailed.
Perfect. No, it's perfect. That's the kind of information. I think that whenever I have conversations with people all the time regarding trafficking and border issues, and I don't really think a lot of people understand the multiple dimensions. I mean, they understand that there's trafficking that occurs. So when you start talking about these details and how intricate and sophisticated, then they start thinking more about the topic. And so that's why I like to hear the detail.
Well, I didn't mean to go on, but there's a lot to it. And, these people are no joke. I specialize in the cartels, because one thing I can tell you that the government has done is that they have for too long focused domestically on the smuggling, the trafficking, the weapons, the money, and all the things that are happening in this country. And that's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is this: at the core now, the very core, the Mexican cartels control it all, gentlemen, plain and simple. That's the way it is. Talk to any biker gang, talk to any tier 1 gang in the United States, talk to any street gang in the United States. They work, contract, and support cartel operations, plain and simple. They don't control the old biker gangs that used to control the meth game in the United States. They don't do it anymore. That is all run by Sinaloans, and it's all run by the CJ&G, plain and simple. And their tentacles into our country are unbelievable. And so that's why you see me doing what I'm doing. I'm illuminating their operations to the American public as someone who's gone after them in Mexico, shared intelligence with the Mexican government, and really crippled the Los Zetas organization, working with some of the best in the world to do it. And that's why I'm doing what I do now, because there is no stopping this. If anybody's under the impression that they're going to give up or they're going to feel bad, when you're talking about people who have killed over 310,000 of their own citizens in Mexico since 2007, they have no problem killing men, women, and children in this country all day, as you see in the overdose death crisis right now. They don't even think twice. Matter of fact, if you noticed in the last month, you've now heard about the candy or rainbow fentanyl, where they are now targeting youth in the U.S. So take my word for it. As somebody that has sat across from them, debriefed them, built programs to go after them, if there's some impression that they're going to stop, they can't stop. And this thing is completely out of control. And they'll tell you that when you sit across from them and you talk to them.
So let's talk a little bit about the fentanyl and how much is coming across, and in comparison, how dangerous is it, and how does it stack up historically with other drugs that are coming across?
Yeah, that is really one of the major shifts. So we first saw fentanyl at the southwest border in 2015. If anybody goes to the CBP website, that's one of the best websites you can go to really understand the pressure wave that the U.S. is feeling as a result of transnational crime, apprehensions, gotaways, drug seizures, et cetera, because that is the largest federal law enforcement agency, and it's a great website. They do a great job. I give the men and women of CBP a lot of credit for their data. They're the most transparent of all federal law enforcement agencies. But if you go there, what you'll see is that in 2015, they seized 70 pounds of fentanyl. That was the first fentanyl seized at the southwest border, was in 2015. And ever since then, the overdose deaths, according to CDC data, skyrocketed. I mean, the art, guys, is incredible. It's like nothing we've ever seen. So what happened? Well, what happened was China had been moving fentanyl via the U.S. mail for many years, right? And just as the cartels do, they understood that there was a major need in the United States to fill that gap from the doctor shopping that had been happening, which is basically a heroin high. And so they started getting in the chemical precursors themselves, which they had already been working with China for years on the methamphetamine, because they had taken over the methamphetamine labs and the mega labs years earlier. So all they did was adjust to different chemicals, NPP and what's called 4A NPP, having it shipped in massive quantities. And that's when they began building their pill mills and moving powder fentanyl first, and then fentanyl pills that we see today. Now, today, you hear the term weaponization of fentanyl, but no one ever explains what they're talking about. We see three forms of fentanyl. We see regular fentanyl, we see parafentanyl, and we see serafentanyl. This stuff is so volatile. Right now, I just got back from Arizona. The DEA lab, according to Sheriff Mark Lamb, who I interviewed publicly, got it out nationwide. The pills that they're inspecting that are being seized by DEA, 40%, I want to say this again, 40% are hot pills. That means it would kill the host if it was taken. Now, why is that? What's happening? What is happening is the cartels are using industrial grade presses, and they're pressing so much of this so often, they're not cleaning out the presses. So that you're getting a load up in a pill. Do you see what I'm saying? And that's how you're getting the hot pill. That's the process of what's taking place. It's a mess, though. Now you have the color formed fentanyl that we see. That color fentanyl is basically, they call it Skittles or rainbow on the streets, lollipops, whatever. But at the end of the day, that was a strategic decision by the Los Chapitos cell of the Sinaloa. Those are the sons of Chapo Guzman, to target youth. We know that. That information was linked to me by federal law enforcement. And some of those first seizures came across in Nogales, Arizona. Why? Because Sinaloa controls everything that moves through those plazas in Sonora into Arizona. Arizona right now, guys, is ground zero for fentanyl coming into the United States.
I think last time we were in Austin about 3 weeks ago, and you had mentioned about a recent bust. I believe it was Albuquerque.
Yeah.
It was about 6 weeks ago, I think, based on, it was August, I think. You want to talk about that?
Sure. It was incredible. And that's another validator to just the sheer amount. So the border tells you the pressure wave, right? You can measure the amounts being seized by CBP in, let's say, fentanyl. By the way, more now than ever before at any other time being seized by CBP for fentanyl. But then you look at the domestic seizures. And when you're seeing back-to-back seizures like we're seeing now, where in Albuquerque after a 1 month, by the way, 1 month investigation. As an old narc, I can tell you this should have, even after a 2-year case, this would have been a massive, massive bust. They took down over 1 million pills of fentanyl. They took down 142 pounds of, I'm sorry, not pounds, kilos of methamphetamine. And they also seized $4 million in US currency. I think it was 2 hand grenades and some body armor. Now, who did they run on? They made a run on 2 major cells. First cell was MA, or Mexican Mafia. The other was Serranos. Now, these are street gangs. These are street gangs with $4 million in currency. And what this tells you is the amount of it. So the next question I asked is, well, guys, how much is methamphetamine going for a kilo in Albuquerque? $3,700 estimated, based on how many keys you're ordering at a time per kilo. I'm like, hang on, time out. I've never heard of so much meth going for that small amount. Usually in my day, when I was buying dope, guys, as a narcotics agent, by the way, you're looking at methamphetamine at a pound, 13 to 15 at the border. To see it that far in the country and for that amount, as buying it, and not by pounds anymore, by the way, they buy it by the kilo now, just like you do coke, because there's so much the cartels are pushing. So when I hear those things, and if you notice in the news, you're always seeing back-to-back million-plus pill fentanyl seizures now. That tells you that it's not only being seized at the border, but also domestically in our country. And the fact that the price point has dropped tells you that the supply is everywhere. And when I'm talking to agents who work undercover, both at the state and at the federal level, they're telling me, Jason, we've never seen the amount of dope coming in right now. Why? Well, hell, the border's wide open, guys. These are the consequences for what's happening.
Is there any kind of estimations on, I mean, these are the catches that you get, the ones that get by. Is there any estimations?
Yeah, we've done a lot of debriefs with the cartel bosses after we've gotten them extradited into the United States. And I can give you a great example. OCL Cardenas, who ran the Gulf Cartel, he admitted to us that 10 to 12% is what they call just it's the price of doing business.
Breakage?
That's the way they look at it. Yeah,
that's what they call breakage,
Yeah, it's just part of it. And they don't even think twice about it, that's what we're getting. Now, that's when we've got border security going on. We have no border security going on right now. I want to be very clear on that. When you see those law enforcement officers down there, all they're doing is working to process men, women, and children in those harsh environments based on the guidance from DHS as to what their job is. If there's anything left or extra, that's when they go to try to do something about the drugs and other things. And I'm telling you that as somebody that's on the border, who's talking to these people and embedding with law enforcement almost every other week. So that's why we are where we are. There are consequences for bad policy.
So I see a comment from Sean Garrett. He asked, how can regular Americans help you, especially with the current administration?
Well, thank you, Sean. I appreciate that question, buddy. Right now, what we try to do is really go in and work side by side with law enforcement. And I've been absolutely humbled because, law enforcement today has lost the ability to communicate with journalists. And so from my standpoint, there's not really too much you can do for me. I mean, I really appreciate that. But what I'm trying to do is get as close to the problem with the men and women who are fighting it and illuminate their operations and what they're going through, because that's as close to the criminal underworld as we can get. That's as close as it gets. And that's where the newest, latest trends are that are really happening. And then I don't want to talk about it. I want to show it to you. See what I mean? And that's where we win. So I appreciate it. There's not really too much, though. I will tell you, though, for folks out there who are wondering what you can do is notify your state representative, your state senator, and your congressman and your U.S. senator that enough is enough. We have lost 107,622 Americans last year alone to these deadly drugs coming into this country. The game has changed. And the spillover violence from this as well is crossing into our country. And I illuminate that as well. So we have got to have policy changes. That is the only fix we can have right now. And if we don't put enough pressure on our political leaders, we are not going to fix this problem. That's just the plain truth of it. Operation Lone Star is a great example of that. That is a multi-billion, with a B, Texas funded operation where they have pushed literally 12,000 Texas National Guardmen, all DPS, which is about an 8,000 man operation that rotate every few weeks down to that border. Everyone is exhausted. They've been at it for 2 years now, and it's not even close to enough because the problem set is so big. So we've got to have, this is a policy failure, guys. It's a massive, massive policy failure.
You know, it's interesting. I actually had a conversation with somebody that I worked with back in 2015, I believe it was. And it was, they were in the oil and gas, and they were down there where Anadarko and Exxon on the borders where they were drilling. They'd had little cities, and the cartel guys, the mercenaries, they would get bored. So they go try to rob these places. So all these facilities, they were armed to the teeth. They were drawing Humvees with 50 cal fully automatic weapons. And they basically, there were skirmishes happening on a weekly basis. And they told my colleague that every single week they were burying guys in the desert, you know, bad guys. And they had, the first couple of times they engaged, they would report it to Border Patrol and, you know, whoever else they were required to. And they were advised, you know, hey, it's a lot of paperwork. It's easier if you just bury them in the desert. You know, that was kind of an off the record comment, but I was pretty shocked at the time because I didn't know what was going on down there. So I've told many people that there are gunfights down there on a regular basis on the border. I don't know if you've ever heard.
Oh yeah. If you go to my website at tripwiresandtriggers.com, you can watch an 1.5 hour long gun battle that Lara and Logan and I covered together when she was with Fox, where they were utilizing everything from a 40 millimeter grenades to hit the rival armored vehicles. That's why they use those grenades to slow them down, because they'll tell you they fight with armored vehicles because mobility is life. And so they're always moving in those things. 50 caliber belt fed machine guns. I mean, this thing was it was great that we caught it finally with one of the nation's leading journalists to get it out nationwide, and we did. So you're absolutely right. Look, last month on Newsmax, we broke the story just across from Aravaca, two cartel bases, one where a drone was sent over the top of it. We broke the story. Guys fully kitted right on our border, two-way handheld encrypted radios that they're utilizing. And literally in this base, they had these fortified positions where they would move and shoot from one place to the next. So you're absolutely right. Anybody can go to Roma, Texas, and on any given week, they're averaging 1 to 3 gun battles a week down there.
Wow. That's just crazy. That is crazy.
Jason, what was that website again? I got somebody that was.
Yeah, tripwirestriggers.com. Tripwirestriggers.com.
And you also have a YouTube channel, don't you?
I do. I think it's under my name, Jaeson Jones, Jaeson Jones. We put a lot of stuff there, and we post almost daily now. Don't get me wrong, the social media gods don't like me very much. I'm in social media timeout more than anyone I know, just so you know, for just showing what's happening. But, you know, it is what it is.
Well, that's okay. We do have a press release we're about to pop out, and we'll share it with you when it goes live. But basically, Craig Sawyer, our founder, which you know, he just recently got his permanent ban from LinkedIn, and we listed all of the platforms that we've been shadow banned and or permanently banned. And there's also a list of hashtags that are getting suppressed. And to give you an example, if you were to look at, and Tyler, am I going to get in trouble for saying these things? Are we being monitored?
Oh, you're being monitored. You're in trouble, no doubt, buddy.
Well, let me put it to this way.
You got me on here.
Yeah, it's hashtag human trafficking is not being suppressed. However, if you go to an underaged version, it's being suppressed or blocked. So anyway, we're going to be releasing that, Jason. It's a pretty interesting article that Kim Kelly put together for us, and I think Craig. I've already read it. I think Craig's got to take a look at it, and we'll blast that out.
Great, congrats.
So, how many folks have crossed the border this year alone?
In the last 11 months, 2.1 million people have been apprehended at your southwest border alone. I want to say that again, 2.1 million. We know that there have been over 580,000 gotaways that we know of. What's a gotaway? If you're not familiar with a gotaway is where a CBP agent sees someone and they count that as a stat. A sensor picks them up and they count that as a stat, or they read sign in the ground. Sign is where you track people based on their footprints. And Border Patrol agents are some of the best in the world at being able to track people. And so they count that. And that's what gotaways are. In the last 2 years, under the current administration, there have been, guys, get this, 900,000+ known gotaways.
Wow. Well, 2.1, that's about half of New Mexico. I believe New Mexico, they're about 4 million population last time I checked.
I don't know. I'm
maybe
not sure, but it's an example of the sheer, look, what's coming across, and with these wristbands and the cartel's operations and the way they have changed their operations, I call it America's new slave trade. And it doesn't feel well. It doesn't read well to people. It hurts the heart, but truth still matters. And it is the truth. We are going to be dealing with human trafficking in this country at a level we have never felt before because of these policies and what the cartels specifically have done. See, that's the story that is not told that I get very frustrated with. They're so emboldened, they're putting these on men, women, and children. And anyone, take 5 minutes right now and just look it up. Like type in cartel begafo or just wristbands on being used as human trafficking. It's well written about it. And yet, still to this day, it just continues.
So once somebody journeys across, and you said they're now indentured, and so how long do we know how long it takes for them to work off their debt to their traffickers?
Well, it's a great question. That's part of the problem. So let's say you are able to make a half payment. So let's say just across that southwest border was $2,500 because you're a Mexican citizen, right? Well, you could pay $1,500 of it. So you still owe $1,000, let's say, right? So now you travel throughout the country, you start making your payments, you're almost done, and they decide, no, you're not done. That's very common. We're hearing this all over now. No, they're going to make you pay. You owe another $1,000. You were a day late. There was a great story out of Houston with the Department of Public Safety, Criminal Investigations Division, who ran on a local, basically a local madam house where they were using some women who had just crossed illegally in South Texas, had come up. They were working off their debt. One of the women was 7 months pregnant. And because she was hurting from all the Johns she had to be with, plus she was pregnant, she asked to have a day or two off, and then they charged her more money for taking off. So guys, get ready. We're going to see things. These are harsh topics. They're hard to talk about. I get it. But, we have not recognized what has changed in Mexico and how it's impacting our country, because Mexico's a great place. But unfortunately, these cartels have been allowed to take over that country, and Mexico's in real trouble right now. And that is directly impacting us based on the policies that we have. It's just the way it is.
Do you see any light at the end of the tunnel with our current situation, or are we still at a point where we need to be shouting at the rooftops towards our policymakers?
Well, there are solutions, right? I say this all the time, that what we're dealing with is absolutely fixable. The immigration layer is one part of this, right? I think most people, when you talk about what's happening at the border, we look at it through the lens of immigration. That's a piece of it. It's a layer of the problem. The national security implications, like what we're talking about with the human trafficking, how people are being treated, this new thing of forced labor and debt bondage. These are game changers. Never mind the overdose death crisis, really poisonings that are taking place, and the number of terrorists that have been apprehended at the southwest border between the ports of entry. The national security implications are what I try to really illuminate, because those are my concerns that impact Americans every single day in this country. But that's absolutely fixable. If you take away the immigration issue, which is another thing that's easily fixable, enforce the law, build the border wall. If you cross illegally, you're going to be apprehended and you're going to be removed from the country, and get back the programs we have, the migration protection protocol. We know that those, along with the over the horizon approach, fix the immigration issue, because we saw that in the data. I don't care about left, right, up, or down. The problem is that what works and the data showed in the last administration's policies, we're working on illegal immigration. Now let's transition to the national security issue, which is where my focus really is. That issue first have to take a look at what is impacting Americans first. First and foremost is fentanyl and methamphetamine. We've got to hit the labs. You cannot arrest or seize your way out of this problem. You got to go after the cartels and you got to go after those labs. Well, how do you do that? Well, first you've got to designate them as foreign terrorist organizations. And it doesn't mean that we're going to war with them. What it means is it's giving us tools of national power. When you're operating outside the boundaries of this country, our Fourth Amendment moves very slow domestically, and we all want that. That is a cushion for us. The Founding Fathers were brilliant in this. And as somebody that lived and breathed Fourth Amendment and search and seizure when it's unreasonable and trying to build up to probable cause, it's extremely difficult under the investigative process. We want it that way to make sure that every T is crossed, every I is dotted. Now, when you're operating outside the boundaries of the country with the FTO designation, now you can move with speed. And I'll give you three main examples. First, if we have the designation, we can go after their assets. You hear about this all the time. But what they don't tell you is that for over 20 plus years, we've been going after their money and their assets, but we are doing it through the lens of an investigation, and it moves very slow. Outside the boundaries of this country, you're allowed with the FTO designation to go seize their property almost real time. So it's putting speed into the system. Second, you can't be a terrorist in the United States if we have this designation. It's going to allow us, if they're here on a visa, to revoke it, or if they're here illegally, to get them out like that. I don't have to work a 2-year case on drugs. I'm putting speed into the system to get the cancer out of our country. And then third and final is limiting their mobility globally. You can't fly on aircraft. You can't get on a boat and cross the globe. I'm limiting you to Mexico. So think of what we're doing. We're taking their assets, using it against them. We're limiting their mobility, and we're removing the problem set from our country at a much quicker speed. And then the way we go after them is not what has traditionally been done. We look at them as they are, which is a mesh network or a different types of networks, hubs, spokes, wheels, whatever they are. And we go attack them that way. And I don't go into much detail on that process because that gets into tradecraft, but I will tell you that going after them as a capo or a boss or this or that those days are over. We go after them based on the network that they are, how they operate, and we crush them. And if there's anyone that thinks that that's undoable, that these things are too powerful, let me tell you, that is not correct. The problem is that we have had no initiatives to go after them, and you see it right now. I mean, when I look at what's taking place right now, it is so much worse than it was when I was working and we were trying to do everything we could to go after the Los Zetas, who had become hyper violent, were executing Mexicans. Let me tell you, when those stories come out, guys, Americans are going to be stunned at what was taking place. There's some real horror stories there. But anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. But yeah, that's how we do it.
So with all these people coming into our country, and then you also have the operators. I think you had mentioned a couple of stories about the crime, some horrendous crimes that have happened, north of the border, significantly north of the border. You want to talk about any of that?
Sure. I think that there's this perception that, as long as it stays over there, right, then, what happens here, it's not our problem, it's Mexico's problem. The problem is that it has been happening here. It's been happening here for a very long time. 2013, sitting in my office in the Texas Rangers Border Security Operations Center when one of my lieutenants and one of my agents walked in and said, "Hey, we got a problem." I said, "What is that?" He said, "We got a homicide in South Lake, Texas." I said, "Why is that a problem?" He said, "It's a problem because we have got the FBI, DEA, and HSI on scene." I said, "Yeah, that's a problem. Okay, get up there." And what had happened was a Gulf Cartel lawyer who had been working for the Gulf for many years, was executed in South Lake Mall. But the tradecraft that they had utilized in this was incredible. He had been in hiding, and the Beltran Leyva organization had put tracking devices on his family's vehicles. And for months, had been tracking all of their vehicles until they finally found him. And then they followed him and with precision executed him in that mall. 2015, same thing. I'm sitting in my office. Here comes one of my lieutenants and one of my agents. "Hey, Captain, we got a problem." "Yeah, what is it?" "We got a body floating in the intercoastal with no head, and it's been gutted from here down to the belly button, and all the entrails have been yanked out." And within a few hours, we learned that this individual had been shot in South Texas. His head had been removed. We were told by our sources it had been taken to the plaza boss of the Gulf Cartel in Mexico. And then shortly after that, working with the Texas Rangers, we arrested a U.S. Border Patrol agent and a cell that had been working with the Gulf Cartel. And see, I can do these one-offs. I can tell you about one in Alabama where, autistic girl and her grandmother, she was beheaded. I mean, I can do this all day long. And so the spillover violence has been happening. I can tell you about the Hebronville incident where we had the guys carrying military-grade weapons over 80 miles into the United States and, moving a high value within the cartels. I can tell you about the Phoenix deal that happened in June, I think it was, or July of this year, where you had a guy carrying a 50 caliber Barrett, fully kitted in a vehicle driving down Interstate 10 going into Phoenix. He's got 3 or 4 Glocks. He's got an M4 and an AK-47 with a drum mag, and they're driving by Arizona DPS troopers on Interstate 10. That's out there, folks. So you see, we can do these one-offs all day, but the problem is the data collection that we have doesn't capture spillover violence. So when you hear a guy like me in southern states screaming, we've got problems, and you hear from the northern states, well, we hear you, but we don't see it. They're not lying, and the South has not been lying. The problem is the system under the FBI called the Uniform Crime Report that collects this data does not collect transnational crime. And so if you're going to change a multi-billion-dollar program within the FBI, DEA, HSI, you've got to have data to validate that shift. And so for a very long period of time, I understood what the problem was. The problem now is that now it has eclipsed so much that we've lost 100,000 Americans in just a year. And that is not okay. And it's going to continue to get worse until we fix it. So I don't mean to go on, we've got a lot of solutions here, but I can tell you this and don't let anybody tell you otherwise. This is absolutely fixable, but it's not going to be fixed being kind and gentle.
So would you recommend that if I write my state and federal congresspersons to specifically ask them to declare the cartel as terrorist organization?
Absolutely, at both the state and the federal level. If you notice, Texas just did that. We are the first state to declare that the cartels are a foreign terrorist organization. The problem is at the state level, it has no teeth. It's got no authorities under it right now. However, if your state will also file it, then your legislature can now come behind it and add the teeth. So see, that's what's taking place in Texas. And I will tell you that I am I'm working that in great detail, from writing laws for the state, all kinds of things, trying to help in that regard, using the authorities of a state to do everything it can do, and then work with other states to be able to collaborate in that endeavor. And what you're going to see now as a result of this is it's going to continue to escalate where other states are going to follow Texas. And I think Arizona will be the next one, but we have to get it ultimately at the federal level. And it doesn't matter. It's already coming. I mean, at the end of the day, the pressure is on the U.S. State Department. Their failure will echo in time to families across this country for their failure to do what needs to be done, because you don't need Congress. You don't need anyone. The job of the U.S. State Department is to make these designations, and they have failed. Specifically, the Western Hemisphere Division's executive leadership have failed us across the board by refusing to do what needs to be done.
And I would also say, don't limit your letters to just your Congress. We do have a House Majority Leader. We have a Senate leader. So there's leadership folks that you can write as well. They are supposed to be representing all of us in certain matters, especially this matter. Tyler, you got anything to add to that?
Mr. Jones, I know you've given a lot of solutions on how we can fix the border crisis. Is there anything else that you may have missed that you think would be very helpful for people to know on ways that they can help in getting more active?
I will tell you, one of the things that I've seen, look, I brief a lot of your state legislators or your federal legislators, and I brief them on what's happening. And what I've learned, and I've been stunned by this, guys, by the way. I've just been stunned. I've always thought for a very long period of time that most of the issues were because of just how polarized everything is. But what I have found is when I'm sitting with these people confidentially, that they truly don't have an understanding of what's occurring. Do you know what the very first question is I ask now? When was the last time before I say anything to them, I say, ladies and gentlemen, when was the last time you were briefed, either classified or unclassified, by local, state, or federal law enforcement on what's happening in Mexico and how it's impacting your state or our country? You would be stunned. One person. Look, I just left Arizona. I briefed between 15 and 18 legislators at one time. In South Texas last year, I briefed about 6 or 7 congressmen. It's always the same. I have had one person say, Jason, I received a classified briefing from U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and the guy that briefed me hadn't been on the border in 10 years. That's what I hear from your elected leaders. So what I have found is this is exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm briefing them to make sure they understand, because if anybody believes you're getting intelligence from the media, let me be very clear. Your media doesn't have a well understanding of what's taking place with these cartels and how it's impacting Americans. And I mean, it's really stunning. I crossed the country. I lectured once at Iona College, and I remember when I left, it was about 2.5 years ago. When I left, everything was fine. When I landed, they had a group from Black Lives Matter there that heard that a guy from Texas who worked for a racist organization was coming in to speak about the border. And they were extremely concerned. And when I laid out what I talk about, which is crime against people and how these cartels have been treating people, they loved me. They invited me back the next year. It was fantastic. I mean, everybody was stunned. And it's the same everywhere. The truth is, if you're in the Northeast or the Northwest, you are not being told what's happening. And so, don't get me wrong, there's always politics involved. But what I have found is that your legislators truly have no understanding of what we're up against. And that's what they need to know. And that's what I would tell you, that we need to make sure that they get briefed in any way, shape, or form that you can. And especially guys like you who are out there who are fighting for children and doing the things you guys are getting in as well. You're seeing it. So, anybody can talk to these folks and try to illuminate what is happening in your own backyard. It doesn't have to be a guy that's retired like me. Any of us can step up and make it happen.
That's true, Jason. You do a very good job. Your presentation, the information that you present in the manner in which you present it, it's easy to digest. I find that a lot of people struggle with certain things because of how information is presented to them. So I was really, when I met you in Austin and watched your presentation, I was, first of all, I was shocked, and I've been down there, but from what I've seen, the numbers and the information that you shared, it was exponentially worse than what I could ever imagine. Especially when you talked about fentanyl. I mean, there's enough fentanyl to kill every person in our borders. That's just crazy. And, and then now you're talking about 40% of those pills are hot. I certainly understand what that means. I think it was you, or it was Dr. I can't think of his Spears, Dr. Spears or Spires. He was showing an illustration. It was like 5 or 6 grains of sand was enough to kill you. Such a small amount that they apply. So I could certainly see how you could have a hot pill, because you could have 1 grain stick into the dye, and then the next time another one could stick, and next thing you know, you're cranking down 2 and 3 times in a pill of what somebody should be ingesting.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I appreciate the kind words you were saying about the presentation, man. I work hard to try to, it's hard to come across with some of this stuff. It's hard to watch, for a lot of folks. They're seeing things that are pretty brutal, but I appreciate the feedback. We work really hard to try to get the word out about what's happening and deliver it to where people will consume it and try to take something from it. We got to fix what's happening. I still can't get over that this has been allowed by our government. I mean, I'm a big believer in the homeland security enterprise. I come from that world, and to see the level of leadership failures that we're seeing, beyond left, right, and all that, we've got the homeland security enterprises whose job it is to tell all of us as Americans what's happening. And for me to see the level of failure on that front right now, it's like nothing I've ever witnessed.
Yeah, it seems to me, and certainly there's the security on our airplanes is highly warranted, but I wish that they would apply the same initiative on our borders as they do at our airports. It just doesn't make. I'm like you. I'm baffled. It doesn't make sense. I talk about this, and I mention your name. I bet I talk about you every day. Anybody that I get in front of to talk about what we're doing, I mention you. I mention Ammon. I mention several others that Art Del Cueco, Mark Lamb. I mentioned people that are in the fight, and they deal with this on a daily basis. And these are guys. They're not, they could be doing with their time. There are a lot of other things that they could be doing. They could be highly successful, but they are true patriots, true warriors down there on the border every day. And I imagine it's got to be very hard for these guys because they're not getting the support that is necessary to do the job in which they know they could do better if they would take the handcuffs off of them.
I think that's well said, buddy. I really do. Border Patrol agents, these are some incredible people who, you got to really think they're living in some of the most extreme environments in our country. Our borders are pretty tough. If you go to the south, it's extremely hot. If you go to the north, it's extremely cold. And they take that job on and they wear that badge because they believe in national security. And for them to be doing what they are doing, which is taking care of men, women, and children to process them faster, that's the role of them right now. It is such a morale crusher on people like I've never seen. Because one thing you can't do is you can't look at them on national television as the DHS secretary or as their leader of their organization and tell them that they're doing a great job when they are down there and they know that fentanyl's getting by. They know it. They know that terrorists are getting by them. So you're not confusing anybody when your leadership tells you that, and you've seen that backlash as some of them actually went after their chief here last year, or earlier this year. You may remember that. They have had it, and I've never seen morale as low it is, but they are incredible people. And I do everything I can to try to illuminate the great work they're doing because, the last border operation I was on in South Texas, I was talking to one of the agents and I'm like, hey man, how are you doing? I said, I noticed I'm seeing more infants than I've ever seen. And he said, Jason, he said, just last week in that Tahoe, and he pointed over to his truck, he said, in Miguel Alemán, they crossed a woman who went into labor, dropped her on the shore. National Guard guys picked her up, carried her almost 3/4 of a mile up to the mobile processing center. He grabbed her, threw her in the back of the Tahoe, and delivered the baby right there. Wow. So, there's so many stories of heroic events. If Americans could see what these men and women in green are doing day in, day out, and this is one of the things why I'm big on cameras on law enforcement, because you would be so proud of those men and women. You really would, because you'd finally be able to see what they're really going through and what they're dealing with every day. It's stunning.
Certainly. Wow.
And those people out there that are out there, giving their day in, day out for the Border Patrol that's down there, and the crisis that they're seeing is just, to me, is very amazing. The level of commitment that they have for that, of their patriotism. I admire everyone that's down there. I did have a couple questions for you, Jason. One is, do you know any numbers of human trafficking that is coming across the border, specifically child trafficking?
See, that's kind of hard. Well, it's a great question, and it's part of the problem, because kind of going back to what I talked a little bit earlier about, we are not collecting statistics on it. So I'll give you a great example. We've been in a supposed drug war in this country for 60 plus years now. Do you know amongst 18,000 law enforcement agencies, the federal government cannot tell the American people how much dope is seized every year? Can't do it. That's why we have to use CBP data, because the system that we have been using has been so broke. So we've got all these PhDs, we got all these people who, got beautiful degrees on the walls that look amazing. And, if you can't get the little things right, you're never going to get the big things right. And that question you just asked, we should be able to clearly give a stat on, based on some government data that pulls it very clearly. We can't do it. We can't even get extortions. We can't get public corruption. We can't get drug trafficking, human smuggling compared to human trafficking. I can't tell you that because they don't even collect it. Now, the new system, NIBRS, they call it new, National Incident-Based Reporting System. This has been one of the things I've been trying to change as well. The NIBRS system they just went to this year, they call it their new system. The FBI guys created it in 1984. They implemented it in 1988. This is the new system. And by the way, it's still not in all 50 states across the country and amongst 18,000 agencies, even close. The data is so broken right now with this transition from UCR into NIBRS, you can't, it's basically useless. So why does a guy who used to work for Texas have some kind of understanding and has been able to speak out on transnational crime? Well, the reason is because we created in Texas, to really be able to measure this, is in the absence of UCR, a unified command concept, where we worked originally with 99 law enforcement agencies from Brownsville all the way to El Paso, Texas, every agency across, and then ultimately up to 171 when I retired. And we were stunned. I mean, I remember some of the data coming in when it first started coming in into the BSOC, the Border Security Operations Center. The data was incredible. I mean, what local law enforcement was going through, we couldn't believe it. So people ask me all the time, Jason, how did Texas legislature fund the state police $880 million for border operations? How did they do it for $1.9 million for Operation Lone Star? Because they see it. When you see the sheer breadth and scope that transnational crime has been impacting on this country by just looking at some agencies, it's a no-brainer. So the reason I've come forward and done what I've done to try to illuminate these crimes is because I know that this is not going to get better, as you are all starting to see across the country now. This was all preventable, guys. That's the worst part. It was all preventable. But, you know, we have lacked leadership for so long in the Homeland Security enterprise. You know, I just interviewed a mom who lost her 17-year-old daughter in Arizona, walked upstairs, knocked on the door, and she was dead in her bed with her laptop sitting on her. Took one fentanyl pill. And that was all because a couple girls came over that night and someone ordered it up. She was not a drug addict. She never had a problem. This is what's happening. You know, it's happening to moms and dads all over the country. And, you know, I tell these stories and I sit down with them. It's pretty tough, but, you know, we've got to show what's taking place, because this is unforgivable, this level of failure, in my opinion. People at the SCS level in the federal government, they should be fired across the board. I mean, there's going to be some massive changes coming eventually. I don't know when, but get ready.
Well, when you look at some of the issues that we're fighting over in our society, and when you start doing numbers on those, and then you look at these numbers, it is illogical. And, you know, it's crazy. I think you said there was about 100,000 people that died from fentanyl in 2021. Vietnam, we lost, 59,000 people in Vietnam. What's the biggest number of, prior to 2021, of drug overdoses did we lose?
Yeah. I mean, that arc is tremendous, and I've got it here actually on my computer. But I'll give you a great example. If you go back to the 80s, and I know you guys can remember that when we had the crack epidemic.
I do, yeah.
Did I just ageist? Is that what I just did?
Yeah.
Well, if you go back to the 80s under the crack epidemic, which for our nation was a big deal. I mean, it was a big deal when it was just hitting communities all over the country, right? And do you know that back then we were only averaging about 10,000 overdose deaths per year? And that stayed pretty much systematic until the mid-2000s, when methamphetamine began being created by the Sinaloans in Mexico. And then you saw a pretty good spike. But the 2015 hike was, I mean, it's a straight up arc, guys. It's incredible.
Wow. It sounds like to me that they've really amped up. I mean, they've created an enterprise business model down south of the border, that they are truly running this like an enterprise corporation. Well,
they are. When you know, let's talk about this for just a minute. I think this will really put it in perspective, because what you just asked is a great point. You know, Cartel Jalisco New Generation, we know, is in over 50 countries now. Sinaloa Cartel is in over 54. They are global terrorists, just like you would see with Middle East terrorist organizations. The problem is the American people have not felt it in the right way yet to truly understand it. Now they're starting to see it, but all you have to do is go online and look at some of the horrific things they do, where they behead people, they cut their hearts out, they eat the hearts, they BSOC men, women, and children. You know, I worked the 72 migrants executed by the Los Zetas in San Fernando. I worked the Allende massacre of 300 men, women, and children. the ICE agents, Zapata and Victor Avila, who were shot up by the Zetas. I mean, the list goes on. These are animals. When you think of barbarians, when you think of the cartel sicarios and what they do to men, women, and children, listen, it's as bad as it gets. I don't know what else you can do to a human body that I haven't seen them do. And so we've got to realize the breadth and scope of what they're doing, not only to Mexican citizens, to migrants and U.S. citizens, but really globally. And I'll just leave you with this, just to kind of put it in an example. In 2016, I was working side by side with the NYPD Intelligence Division because we had a lot of terrorists crossing our southern border, going to New York, and we wanted to make sure that they knew, because we didn't believe that the FBI would do what needed to be done. And so we worked very closely with NYPD. And I was up there for an intelligence conference, and the head of Europol, Mr. Rainwater, asked if there was anyone present that knew about the cartels. And they said, well, hell, we got the cartel guy here, actually. So they came to me and they said, hey, Jason, why don't you go talk to Mr. Rainwater? And so I briefed him for about 30 minutes. And I'll never forget this. I mean, this sticks with me in my mind, because you don't know what you don't know, right? And he says to me, he says, Jason, do you know why I asked for this briefing? And I said, no, sir, I do not. He said, the reason is because when we see violence in Europe and it's linked to drug trafficking, we see a cartel nexus to it. And guys, at that point, as someone who is working it day in, day out, I had no idea to the degree that Europe was now infiltrated with CJ&G, moving methamphetamine and kilos of cocaine into Europe to that degree. And I say that to you because a lot of people are not aware. Australia right now is a great example. It's like Miami was in the 80s in the United States. They are having so much cocaine and so much methamphetamine pushed over there. At one time when I was retiring, a kilo of cocaine was going for $180,000 a kilo because they had such a demand for it. And that supported the rise of Cartel Jalisco New Generation so quickly and so rapidly. A lot of people are not aware of that. They think that our market, because this is what Americans are told, if the US didn't have such a demand, then there wouldn't be a supply issue, right? You hear that all the time. But what Americans aren't told is that we are just one economy for them now. They are a global problem. So the solution to this will not be a US solution only. The tactical game will involve the collaboration of a unified command globally, but I will never go into that publicly and what that will look like and how we're going to crush them. But I will play a major role, I can tell you that, in trying to make sure it happens correctly.
Well, it certainly would be nice if we also saw some of the other countries that are impacted by this to declare the cartels as a terrorist organization, and maybe that would put pressure on the United States to follow suit.
I think it'll probably come the other way. What my gut tells me, based on what I know is happening behind the scenes, both in Mexico and in other countries, we'll lead that fight once we get it here. And then everyone else will come to the table. And Mexico will not come to the table under the current administration. We can put pressure on them, but it's going to take a lot of economic pressure. Ports of entry will have to probably be shut down in order to get the current administration to the table. They're not going to do it. They're too in bed with the cartels and they're corrupt. And I have no problem saying that publicly, privately. I do it all the time. Yeah. Truth still matters, guys. Truth still matters.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Tyler, you got any other questions you'd like to ask?
Yeah. I appreciate you, Jason, coming on here. Why are you aligned with Veterans for Child Rescue and its mission to expose and eradicate child trafficking inside the U.S.?
Well, I think you guys are trying to do exactly what I'm doing, just at a different version, right? And anyone that's trying to expose something happening badly to children, let me kind of put it into granular detail. When I retired, I went through a bad thing. I lost my dad, and I was kind of all messed up in the head. And so I had a good friend of mine who worked with me with DHS, and he was over in the Philippines. And he said, hey, man, why don't you come over and let's meet up in Thailand. And so we went over there. And I got to tell you, what I saw in Thailand stunned me. The amount of trafficking of men, women, and children, listen, that's a game in itself that's totally different. And I spent a lot of time with these traffickers over there to try to be able to, because I speak all over the country, and I could speak to it domestically, but I couldn't speak to it internationally. And one of the reasons that I work with you guys is because of what I learned over there. I mean, the level of the Russian mob involved in that, the Hells Angels involved in that, and their movement of people all over the world, that's a game changer. And so it's coming here. So if you wonder why, I think what you're trying to do to illuminate this problem, the human trafficking issue and the movement of people globally is like we've never seen the movements of people into the U.S. like we have right now from all over the world. And so make no doubt, I can tell you, somebody that's been on that border, I've seen the children who are indebted to these cartels and to, their families who just abandon them so that somebody can move them across, and they have no idea who this person is they're with. I mean, that's trafficking in children. That is happening. Don't let anyone tell you it's not. And I think the numbers right now for the year of unaccompanied alien children that have crossed your border are at 140,000 in the last 11 months. You can find that on the CBP website, by the way, if anybody's interested. Last I looked, it was 140. So now, does that mean there's 140 that are in debt bondage? Absolutely not. But what that number is, we don't know. And when I can tell you, there's no system in this country that can validate and verify. And when I talk to those Border Patrol agents, they will tell you that they are the last line of defense for these children. They'll tell you that. They know that if they don't check closely enough, that the person they're with may very well not be that child's family member. And they're seeing it day in, day out. And I get it out all the time. I mean, I show those pictures, and photographs, and videos of it.
Well, that brings up an interesting point that you mentioned at our last visit. There was a time where they were doing DNA testing, that there were DNA kits that you could determine whether or not there was a familial relationship between the child and the person that was accompanying that child. What happened to that?
I don't know. It's not happening with Border Patrol. I can tell you that. They don't have the resources, they don't have the manpower, they don't have the capability. Hell, they're not even checking them for COVID, guys. They don't have the ability. They're moving people so fast, so quickly. We're seeing numbers we've never seen before, and we're seeing a massive shift of those numbers, by the way, towards El Paso right now. So they don't have the logistics and the capabilities. I mean, I'm an old guy at this. I've been at it a while, and I remember, this kids in cages business. You remember this?
Yeah.
That was going out about Border Patrol and everything else. And I remember watching those men and women bringing diapers from the grocery store where they were swiping their credit cards as fast as they could, because Border Patrol didn't have the logistics. They didn't have it. And the cages was real. I mean, that was a real thing, but it wasn't any conspiratorial thing. There was so many kids crossing and people crossing, they didn't know what to do with them. I mean, I'll give you a great story. You want to talk about just how bad the media has been on things.
Certainly.
I was doing a joint operation as an agent back in 04, 05 called Operation 𝐋𝐈𝐕𝐄, where we were staging and working side by side with Border Patrol as state police narcotics agents on the border. And we hit this house one time, and it was the worst stash house I've ever seen. They were all Hondurans. They were men, women, and children. And when we hit that house, we had watched some smugglers take a group of people in there, and we came in, we surrounded it. Guys went in and they came running back out, and they were covering their mouth and they were gagging. And the reason is because, and they started saying, waving all these people out, and somewhere around 60 men, women, and children came walking out of the stash house. And it had no air conditioning. Now it's probably 103, 104. I'm overheating because we've been out there. There's no air conditioning. All the windows are covered all the windows are covered. You couldn't see in or out. And there was no running water, no air conditioning, no electricity. They had been in there for weeks waiting to get moved. And it was brutal. Well, I'll never forget it. We took them, got them out of there. I had to get cooled off because it was overheating. They were transported to the station, and I went and cooled off, and we went to sleep because we were coming back out that night. So I go to the station that evening, and I walk out the back, and there's all these men, women, and children. And I'm stunned. They're in these cages like you're talking about. And the agent says to me, I'll never get this. He says, "Jaeson, man, this was a bad one." And I said, "What do you mean it was a bad one?" He said, "Man, every one of the women and the girls all claimed they had been sexually assaulted, because at that point, the Honduran smugglers were raping them. And Hondurans were new to us. We weren't used to them. We were used to Mexican citizens. So this was new. I had never seen Hondurans in the United States. This was my first group. And unfortunately, the smugglers had all raped them. So here I'm looking at, now imagine this, I'm looking at sexual assault victims. I don't know, there's probably somewhere between half were women and young girls in there. And so that's at least 25 to 30 is half, right? Of that 60. And I'm thinking to myself, my God, if the American public saw this and knew that half these people were sexual assault victims, they didn't even have counselors for them. So it was a logistical nightmare that Border Patrol and U.S. Customs and Border Protection never had to deal with. But yet, these are the things that were turned into, left or right, up or down, right or wrong issues instead of bad policy. And so anyway, it's been going on a long time, guys. There's been a lot of tragedies on that border for a long time.
Wow.
There's a lot of stories that could be told, that really needs to be shared out there, because there's so many things that the American populace doesn't know about the border. And the trauma that these innocent children that are going through, that are surviving this, and the women and men as well, it's very chilling to me, knowing that the American populace just really doesn't know about us. So
I agree
Jaeson,
with you. I agree.
Yeah. Jaeson, do you have anything else that you'd like to get in before we start wrapping this up?
The one thing is that I always want to close on a positive note. What I throw out there can be pretty depressing. I mean, it's just the truth of it, right? But I want folks to know that while we talk about and we illuminate the problems, we also have to illuminate solutions. And the solutions I've talked to you about today, there's going to be a lot of them that are required. One is leadership. We're going to have to make some serious changes in our federal system. The federal agencies at the executive level, they have been lacking leadership for a very long time. And there's going to be a lot of new initiatives that are going to have to take place. But all of this, at the end of the day, it's absolutely fixable. I'm not just saying that because it sounds good. I'm telling you this because it is. And there is no getting around it. I know these cartels very, very well. They're out of control. They will tell you they are out of control. And once we begin to go after them, once we really begin to secure this border and stop these things, that's where we can then start cleaning up what is in this country that can hurt us and really start making some changes. But I will say this, as a nation, we're going to have to get tough. These cartels are no joke. These people do not walk around with a Born to Lose tattoo on their forehead. This is skilled tradecraft. These are people who are at what, as they say it, war every day. And as a nation, we're going to have to get tough, and we're going to have to go after them. And it is coming for what they've done to so many Americans.
Well, I'm confident the American people are up for the task. We just have to have policymakers that are going to give us the latitude to do that.
It's time.
All right, Tyler.
All right. Well, I'm going to close this off with a little positive message. Then I'll wrap it up with a prayer. So actually, I want to talk a little bit about leadership. You need to regulate your leadership. Recognize when someone should be pushed and when someone doesn't need the nudge. Take note on where your team is at. We are all leaders here. Most of you watching have children. You are their inspiration to being a great role model that they can take and build their own character. You want your children to be a better version of yourself, a better steward to the planet and the community, better neighbors, better providers, and that is your purpose. I'll wrap this up with a little prayer here. If y'all can bow your heads with me. Dear Heavenly Father, please look after Jaeson Jones and his mission to shine the light on the border issues. And please pray that his purpose and his solutions get heard out there. He's out there showing the dangers that are coming across into our country. Please keep looking after all of us that are in this fight together to better our livelihood. Lastly, look over and guide the ones that are struggling out there. Please show them a sign of light so they know that they are not alone. And that's all I got to say. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, buddy. That was great. Appreciate that.
Well, Jaeson, I appreciate you coming on here. Forrest, I appreciate it as always.
Always a pleasure.
I wish you guys the best, and stay blessed out there and keep fighting that fight, Jaeson.
Thank you, Jaeson.
Guys, I appreciate you. If I can do anything for you, please don't hesitate to reach out. And I'm going to be on the border all this week. So watch Newsmax. We'll be covering the latest and greatest. And when I get back, be happy to do a follow-up or whatever we can do to keep getting the word out. So thank you, guys. I appreciate the opportunity as always.
And how can people follow you before you take off? That way they can stay up to date with.
You bet. We'll be on Newsmax this week. All week long, I'll be going live every single day and into the evening hours. But in addition, you can find us Jaeson Jones. That's Jaeson, Jaeson Jones. We're on TikTok, YouTube, Twitter. We post every day, so you can find the latest that we're doing out there.
Awesome, Jason. I appreciate that. Now, you guys got any last minute things before we go? All good?
All right.
All right.
We're good.
Everyone out there, stay blessed out there, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Take care, guys.